That's the end of our fallacies of distributed computing. After this, we have the fallacies of enterprise computing. Any questions so far on this last set of 4? Yep.
There's another fallacy, really, which is the human factor. So obviously not all developers understand technical implementation as they most capable as each other, which in certainly my team, that's a very big issue. How do we sort of get over that?
Right, so that's not a fallacy of distributed computing per se. It has nothing to do with the network, as you said. It's about the human beings that are involved. Specifically, in this case, you're talking about the developers and the difference in skill sets. That's true in any type of human team endeavor, that not everybody has a similar level of skill. And solving that has been the topic of a great deal of leadership books over the past 100 years or so, as it's kind of become a theme unto itself as a thing to be solved. But I guess sort of the biggest part of it that is probably most relevant for the field of software is Fred Brooks, the mythical man month, of saying that throwing more developers at a late project is really only going to make it later. And it doesn't matter how many decades ago that book was written. It still gets, that same mistake keeps being applied over and over again. So it's not even a question of skill at that point. Even adding a bunch of very skilled developers to a late project is still not necessarily going to save it right away. So that's not a fallacy of distributed computing or of enterprise computing, though we're going to touch on some human process aspects in the enterprise computing part after the break. So maybe we'll wait a little bit till we get into that, and then let me know if there's more that you want to get into. All right? Yes?
Yeah, just wanted to continue a little bit on that.
Mm.
Just take the task from the backlog and say, I'm done, they split them, and off to the next
Right.
task. And that's a trend that keeps growing, it's getting bigger, it's hard to, not the word enforce, but to suggest.
Can I pause you on that? Because, right, so we have a fallacy in the enterprise computer that talks a lot about the common project model. So again, let's table the human side of things until we get into that. It's its own discussion, and I don't want to kind of do it just really quickly. Did you have similar type of thing, or?
Similar.
All right.
It's actually, I think it's about complexity.
Mm-hmm.
Because in distributed computing, that's more complex to build. And the monolith is a lot easier to explain, and the developers can actually do more inside the monolith than if I do a diagram there.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I think actually the skill of the developers is really important, and at our place we even talk about this as a stopping factor, that we can't even introduce event-driven architecture because the developers don't understand it, and it will just
right.
mess.
So I'll address this briefly now, and we'll talk more about it later on because it's connected very much as you described. The building a distributed solution is indeed, at least on the face of it, more complex than building a monolithic centralized one. I'd say that the primary difference is that in a distributed system, we attempt to model the necessary complexity in the domain and to make it explicit. And through that process to minimize accidental complexity. In a monolith type of environment, because there isn't necessarily any explicit modeling of the necessary complexity, it is more difficult to know when am I crossing the boundary from necessary complexity to accidental complexity. And I think that in more monolithic code bases, you have a lot more internal complexity than, and it is equally hard, if not more so, for developers to understand what's going on. Primarily because there isn't a model, there isn't sort of a picture that you can kind of put on a whiteboard somewhere and say, this is how the system is supposed to work. Usually, most environments have some kind of documentation to say, this is how we thought that the system might eventually end up working, but this is not true anymore. And a lot of it is kind of, there's a cargo cult element to it that, well, the last time we had this problem, we did this and it worked. Let's try that again. So again, looking from the side, it appears to me that there's less tools and less leverage in a logically monolithic code base than there is in a logically distributed, well-factored solution. But a lot of this relates to organizational factors as well, which we'll get into in just a minute.